Hey, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece for Reason to Resist on April 4th, 2025. This week, the Canadian legal profession sunk to a new low. And let me tell you, my friends, that's saying something. It all started when the Advocate Society canceled a speaking invitation to an individual by the name of Tareq Hadhad. Tareq Hadhad is a Syrian refugee turned entrepreneur and a humanitarian advocate. He now lives in Canada and is the founder of a company called Peace by Chocolate. The Advocate Society is an organization made up of 6,000 judges, lawyers, and other legal professionals from across Canada. Its supposed mission is to ensure that Canada has a strong, independent, and courageous bar. Every year in June, the Advocate Society holds a black tie gala called the End of Term Dinner. Officially, the purpose of this schmooze fest is to commemorate the end of the judicial term in Canada before the summer break. The Advocate Society also holds a convention every autumn, and generally that convention is held in some opulent hotel in some posh Caribbean island. The convention for the fall of 2025 will take place at the Waldorf Astoria in Costa Rica. Now, several weeks ago, the Advocate Society invited Tareq Hadhad to be the keynote speaker at its upcoming end-of-term gala in June. But when some Zionist fanatics in the legal profession found out about the speaking invitation, all hell broke loose. According to the Globe and Mail, Canada's newspaper of record, multiple prominent law firms threatened not to buy tables at the end-of-term dinner. The Globe and Mail does not name any of those law firms, but does name a prominent lawyer who strongly opposed the speaking invitation to Tareq Hadhad. That lawyer's name is Jonathan Lysis. Mr. Lysis is a partner at the Bay Street law firm Lax O'Sullivan Lysis Gottlieb LLP. He was born in Johannesburg, South Africa during the apartheid era, and he came to Canada with his family in the late 1970s when he was 12 years old. I've met Jonathan Lysis. I've had occasion to litigate against him in the past in a class action I prosecuted against one of his corporate clients. In the world of high-stakes corporate litigation, Lysis can fairly be described as a heavy hitter, a go-to litigator for the corporate elite. He was named Canada's Trial Lawyer of the Year by Benchmark Litigation in 2020 and 2024. Now, to explain why he opposed the speaking invitation to Tareq Hadhad, Mr. Lysis gave an interview to the Globe and Mail. According to the Globe and Mail, Lysis rejected accusations that the concerns he and others have about Mr. Hadhad, who I'm sure is a very fine man, he said, amounted to attacks on free speech. Mr. Lysis stated, "I encourage Mr. Hadhad to hold and express his opinions and would resolutely defend his right to do so. The end-of-term dinner isn't a debate union or a university current affairs club. It's a supper to mark the end of court session where advocates meet for dinner as friends, not adversaries, and celebrate legal advocacy." In his email to the Advocate Society, which the Globe and Mail viewed, Lysis wrote, "Mr. Haddad's record of public statements makes a strong case that while expressing understandable concern for civilian deaths in Gaza, he is unsympathetic and certainly indifferent to the harm and suffering of Jewish people in the Jewish state. In my respectful view, the Society's choice to feature a speaker who holds such a one-sided view of an issue of overriding concern and great anguish to its Jewish members is highly insensitive and in very poor taste." Lysis told the Globe that if Mr. Hadhad had also publicly lamented on issues such as Iran's missile attacks on what he described as Israeli population centers, or the murder of the Druze children in what he described as northern Israel, then he would not have complained about Tareq Hadhad's involvement in the end-of-term dinner. Now, before I address Lysis's comments to the Globe and Mail, it bears pointing out that Mr. Lysis has represented the State of Israel in Ontario legal proceedings, and in fact did so very recently. In fact, for all I know, Israel is a current client of Mr. Lysis. Now, either Mr. Lysis did not mention that fact to the Globe and Mail, or the Globe and Mail knew of that fact, but for some unfathomable reason, did not disclose it to its readers. Surely Mr. Lysis should have disclosed that information, and the Globe ought to have reported it in an article in which Mr. Lysis criticizes someone who has expressed sympathy for Palestinians. Now, let's turn to the subject of Mr. Lysis's critiques of Tareq Hadhad's social media commentary. Mr. Lysis's main objection seems to be that Tareq Hadhad did not express sympathy for the Jewish citizens of Israel. Because Hadhad did express sympathy only for Palestinians, Lysis believes Hadhad to be very one-sided. But since when are we obliged to express sympathy not only for the victims of a genocide, but for the perpetrators of that genocide as well? Presumably, Mr. Lysis disputes that Israel is committing genocide, but on what rational basis could he do so? Israel's leaders have openly declared that they intend to withhold and are withholding essential food, medicine, and water from the civilian population of Gaza. They have also openly declared, time and time again, that there are no innocents in Gaza. Even the 1 million or so infants and children in Gaza are not innocent in the eyes of these monsters. Moreover, officially, Israel has killed over 50,000 Palestinians in 18 months. But as the prestigious medical journal, The Lancet, opined last year, the number of deaths caused both directly and indirectly from Israel's rampage in Gaza may well be in excess of 180,000 persons. By contrast, and according to Israel, Palestinian militants killed 1,139 Israelis and foreigners on October 7, 2023, and 373 of those victims were security personnel. Thus, fewer than 800 would be civilians. Accordingly, the number of Palestinians whom Israel has killed since October 7th could now be well over 100 times the number of Israelis killed by Palestinian militants on October 7th. Now, I could go on and on citing evidence that Israel is committing genocide, but you don't have to take my word for it, nor do you have to hear me document all of that evidence in the space of this report. In January of last year, the International Court of Justice ruled by a margin of 15-2, which included numerous judges from major Western countries, that it was plausible that Israel is committing genocide. Of course, since that ruling, Israel has killed far more Palestinian civilians and destroyed far more infrastructure in Gaza, meaning that the genocide case against Israel has surely become much stronger than it was in January of last year. The government of South Africa, the country where Lysis was born and raised, is the state that is prosecuting that genocide claim against Israel. In addition, mainstream Western human rights groups and experts have opined that Israel is committing genocide as well. They include UK-based Amnesty International and US-based Human Rights Watch. And this is by no means an exhaustive list of the human rights experts who have opined that Israel is committing genocide, a conclusion with which I wholeheartedly agree. On a related point, the International Court of Justice also ruled last year that Gaza is occupied territory and that Israel's ongoing occupation of Gaza violates international law, and that Israel is obliged to end the occupation as soon as possible, an order at which the Israeli state has thumbed its nose every day since. Days ago, the United Nations reported that Israeli forces executed 15 Palestinian paramedics and rescue workers one by one, and then tossed their bodies in shallow graves in Gaza. Is it the position of Mr. Lysis that for one's criticisms of these monstrosities to be legitimate, we must also express sympathy for Israel's Jewish population? Now, I imagine that Mr. Lysis ascribes to the theory that the October 7th attacks were unprovoked. But by October 2023, it was widely acknowledged that Israel was committing the crime against humanity of apartheid against occupied Palestinians. By that time, even mainstream Western human rights groups had accused Israel of apartheid. Those groups included Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the Israeli human rights groups B'Tselem and Yesh Din. Now, Mr. Lysis told the Globe and Mail that if Mr. Hadhad had publicly lamented on issues such as Iran's missile attacks on Israeli population centers or the murder of the Druze children in northern Israel, Mr. Lysis would not have complained about the Advocate Society speaking invitation to Mr. Hadhad. Evidently, Mr. Lysis likes to regurgitate Israeli propaganda without bringing to bear his own formidable capacity for critical thinking. There's simply no credible evidence that in its missile attacks on Israel last year, Iran targeted population centers in Israel. Iran's first strike happened in April 2024 and was a retaliation for Israel's destruction of Iran's consulate in Damascus, Syria, which had happened earlier that month. The attack on Iran's consulate was a flagrant violation by Israel of international law and a clear act of war. In retaliation, however, Iran attacked various military and intelligence bases in Israel, as well as the Shimon Peres Negev Nuclear Research Center. Unlike Israel's airstrikes, which routinely kill large numbers of civilians, no civilians died in Iran's first missile and drone attack on Israel last year. The second of Iran's missile attacks occurred in October 2024. That attack was retaliation for the killing of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, the capital of Iran, during the inauguration of Iran's new president. That attack also constituted a violation of international law and another act of war by Israel. Again, in its retaliatory missile attack, Iran targeted Israeli military bases. In the course of its second missile attack, one Israeli civilian died, but died as a result of a heart attack caused by stress and anxiety triggered by the attacks. In addition, a 37-year-old Palestinian man was killed in Jericho in the occupied West Bank, but by shrapnel from an intercepted missile and not from a direct hit. No other civilians died in the second Iranian missile attack last year. Mr. Lysis also mentions the murder, as he put it, of Druze children in what he describes as northern Israel. Northern Israel? I have news for this accomplished advocate. The Druze children were killed in the Syrian Golan Heights, which Israel occupies and illegally annexed decades ago. Again and again, in fact, the UN Security Council and General Assembly have recognized that the Golan Heights belong to Syria. Even the Canadian government agrees with this position and has agreed with it for decades. So, Mr. Lysis, these children were not killed in northern Israel. And this raises another question. Why would Hezbollah strike a Druze village in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights? In fact, from the very beginning, Hezbollah denied that it targeted that village. It said that it had targeted a nearby Israeli military base, and there are numerous Israeli military bases in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights. And the village, according to Hezbollah, was hit by an errant Israeli Iron Dome air defense projectile. Moreover, Israeli media reported that when the war criminal Netanyahu went to the Druze village to exploit the deaths of these children for propaganda purposes, he was driven away from the village by the angry villagers who came out to meet him. Does Lysis know about these facts? If so, did he not share them with the Globe and Mail? Or is he that ignorant of the underlying reality? If indeed Mr. Lysis is that ignorant, I say he has no excuse. As I mentioned, he's a lawyer whose experience and accomplishments should, at the very minimum, confer upon him a basic understanding of international law before he pontificates to the national media about why he wants to deplatform a racialized person who has simply expressed sympathy for the victims of a genocide. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this sordid affair is that based upon his social media commentary, Tareq Hadhad can hardly be described as a radical or an extremist. And I'm going to show you some of his posts from the last 6 months just so that you can see how restrained and how mainstream by Canadian standards his social media commentary has been. But before I show you this post, I want to issue a disclaimer. I don't want you to interpret what I'm about to say about Tareq Hadhad's social media commentary as criticism. And I say this for two reasons. First, Tareq Hadhad is a Syrian refugee, and a refugee who has fled Syria, a deeply troubled nation, and who is adapting to life in Canada, might very well feel constrained in what he can say publicly, especially about issues that powerful constituencies in Canada want us to ignore. I can tell you that I feel considerable sympathy for the vulnerability of people in Tareq Hadhad's position, And in fact, that's why a few years ago, I sponsored a Syrian family to come to Canada and start a new life here, which they did. Second, I simply don't know much about Tareq Hadhad. I've never met him. In fact, I've never heard about him before the scandal erupted. All I know about Tareq Hadhad is what I've read in a couple of newspaper articles and what I found on his X account during the past 6 months. And that's not a lot of information to go on in trying to assess the character of an individual. The only reason I'm going to discuss Mr. Hadhad's social media commentary is that it formed the basis, apparently, of Mr. Lysis's remarks and the reactions of other Zionist lawyers. And I want to show you how absurd it is for Zionist lawyers to suggest or imply that Tareq Hadhad is some kind of pro-Palestinian radical or extremist. So during the past 6 months, Mr. Hadhad has tweeted only one time about Palestine. Yes, one single time during a genocide against the Palestinian people. And that post was about as innocuous a pro-Palestine post as you can imagine. His one post during the past 6 months about Palestine related to a film that won an Oscar at the most recent Academy Awards. The tweet which Mr. Hadhad retweeted was in fact an Associated Press tweet talking about the Oscar-winning film No Other Land. And the tweet by the Associated Press stated as follows: No Other Land, a collaboration between Israeli and Palestinian filmmakers that tells the story of Palestinian activists fighting to protect their communities from demolition by the Israeli military, wins the Oscar for Best Documentary. The newspapers report that Hadhad did issue one post that used the word genocide to describe Israel's monstrous crimes in Gaza. I myself, however, did not find any such post when I reviewed his X commentary over the past 6 months. So I can't confirm or deny that he ever issued a post accusing Israel of genocide, but even if he did, why would that form the basis of revoking his speaking invitation? Categorizing Israel's war on Gaza as a genocide is no different than what mainstream Western human rights organizations and experts have done over the past 18 months. Those human rights experts and organizations include Amnesty International, which is based in the United Kingdom, and Human Rights Watch, which is based in the United States. And that is by no means an exhaustive list of all the Western-based mainstream human rights experts and groups that have concluded that Israel is committing genocide. Now, the second thing I noticed about Mr. Hadhad's X commentary during the past 6 months is that he plainly has a lot of affection for Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. Here, for example, is a photo of Mr. Hadhad with Justin Trudeau from March 9th of this year. And here's another photo of Mr. Hadhad and Justin Trudeau from January 6th of this year. And here's yet another post, this one from December of last year, which includes photos of Tareq Hadhad hugging Justin Trudeau. Trudeau is not, by the way, the only Liberal bigwig whom Mr. Hadhad has praised on X. Here's a post from March 9th of this year in which Mr. Hadhad sends his best wishes to the new Liberal Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney. And here's a post which includes a photo of Mr. Hadhad standing beside former Liberal Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. Now, as I've explained many times, the Liberals and Justin Trudeau are unquestionably pro-Israel. Trudeau's government, for example, bought weapons from Israel and allowed Canadian-made weapons to be sold to Israel during this genocide. In 2018, a few weeks after an Israeli sniper shot a Canadian-Palestinian doctor, Tareq Lubani, during Gaza's Great March of Return, Trudeau's government had the audacity to enter into an enhanced free trade agreement with Israel and feted its economy minister in Toronto. Trudeau's government also voted repeatedly in favor of Israel in the UN General Assembly and did so even after the Western and Israeli human rights groups I mentioned documented that Israel was committing the crime of apartheid. A public figure like Tareq Hadhad, who shows so much affection for the pro-Israel government of Canada, can hardly be considered a pro-Palestine extremist or radical. Finally, a third thing I noticed about Tareq Hadhad's commentary on X is that he has taken a position on recent events in Syria that is perfectly aligned with the position of the Canadian government and Zionists. During the past 6 months, Israel has bombed Syria relentlessly. It has also moved its forces into southern Syria, well beyond the Syrian Golan Heights, which Israel, as I mentioned, illegally annexed long ago. Yet during that 6-month period of Israeli aggression against Syria, on X, Tareq Hadhad did not criticize Israel's actions a single time. On the other hand, Tareq Hadhad repeatedly celebrated on X the downfall of Bashar al-Assad. Now, I can certainly understand why he would celebrate the downfall of Bashar al-Assad, even though he was one of the few Arab leaders who still opposed Israel. Because after all, Bashar al-Assad was indeed a dictator and did indeed commit severe human rights violations. Although I doubt very much that his human rights violations were worse and could possibly have been less egregious than those committed by the dictator of Egypt, al-Sisi, and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, both of whom are lavishly supported in every conceivable way by Western governments. What I don't understand is how a Syrian refugee could celebrate what has come after Bashar al-Assad. The new Syrian regime that has replaced Assad is run by a character named al-Jolani. Al-Jolani, who has changed his name to al-Shara, leads an organization called HTS. At the time that he seized power in Damascus last year, al-Jolani had a $10 million CIA bounty on his head, and HTS was designated as a terrorist organization by Western governments, including the liberal government of Justin Trudeau. When al-Jolani seized power by force in Damascus last year, Trudeau publicly congratulated him, even though at that very moment, Trudeau's government designated al-Jolani's organization as a terrorist organization. In December of last year, Trudeau went so far as to tweet that Syria was now, quote, free of terrorism, close quote, despite the fact that at that very moment, the organization that had seized power in Syria was still designated as a terrorist organization by the government of Canada. Folks, you can't make this shit up. Not only that, but Tareq Hadhad retweeted the tweet by Trudeau in which Trudeau claimed that a country led by a terrorist organization was now free of terrorism. In addition, after al-Jolani seized power, and as we have reported numerous times on Reason to Resist, HTS terrorists have committed multiple atrocities against Alawites, Christians, and others in Syria. During the past 6 months, however, Tareq Hadhad did not condemn or express any concern about HTS's atrocities on his X account. Now, I'm speculating here, but perhaps he didn't do that because he has family members in Syria and is concerned for their safety, which would of course be a perfectly legitimate and compelling reason not to speak out and condemn HTS's atrocities. I simply don't know why Tareq Hadhad didn't say anything about those atrocities on social media, at least on X during the past 6 months. Despite all of this going on, Tareq Hadhad, I note, had time to pose for a photograph with the U.S. ambassador to Canada, David Cohen. And of course, in November of last year, when this photo of Tareq Hadhad and David Cohen was taken, the Biden administration was providing the bombs which Israel was using to mass murder Palestinian children. That's all I have to say about the social media commentary of Tareq Hadhad. Based on his comments to the press, Jonathan Lysis did research into that social media commentary. If, however, the esteemed litigator was paying any attention and has an ounce of objectivity about Israel, he would have concluded, as did I, that Tareq Hadhad is no pro-Palestinian extremist, and that his public commentary about Israel and the governments that support Israel is highly restrained. At the end of the day, this whole sordid affair is just another example of how unhinged Zionists have become. Even a whiff of criticism of Israel will send these extremists into a frenzy of censorship and vilification. Finally, I want to say a word about the leadership of the Advocate Society. The president of the Advocate Society is a lawyer by the name of Daryl Cruz. Daryl Cruz is a partner at the high-priced corporate law firm of McCarthy Tétrault, which is based in Toronto, Canada. I happen to know Daryl Cruz personally, and the reason for that is that back when I was at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law, Daryl was also pursuing a law degree there, and he and I managed to earn a place, along with two other law students, on the Faculty of Law's Philip C. Jessup International Law Moot team. And over a period of several months, we practiced together, trained together, we went to the Canadian National Championships together, and there we won the national title. From there, we went on to the international finals to represent Canada in Washington, D.C., and we actually reached the final, finishing second out of 48 nations at the international competition of the International Law Moot. The reason why I mention this is because I can say from personal experience that Daryl Cruz has at least a basic understanding, if not much more than that, about international law. To any competent and objective legal professional, it's an absolute slam dunk, no-brainer that Israel has repeatedly and egregiously violated international law and the human rights of the Palestinian people. So why would Daryl Cruz, a president of the Law Society with some grounding in this subject matter, allow this travesty to happen? How could Mr. Cruz tolerate the deplatforming of a Syrian refugee for such restrained criticism of Israel and of the governments that support Israel? Frankly, I find all of this so troubling that I've decided to issue an unusual challenge to both Daryl Cruz and Jonathan Lysis. You gentlemen are advocates of the highest caliber. You have received accolades from your peers for your advocacy. You have a wealth of experience in the courtroom. Surely, few people in Canada know as well as you do how to defend a position. Therefore, I hereby challenge you to a debate. The question I propose to debate is the following: is Israel committing genocide within the meaning of the Genocide Convention of 1948? Now, I'm willing to debate both of you at different times, one of you only, or hell, I'm willing to debate even both of you at the same time. And if for any reason neither of you is willing to accept this challenge, then I'm happy to debate any lawyer designated by you who is willing to take on this important question with me. In fact, I encourage you to find the most persuasive advocate for Israel to be found in the entire Canadian legal profession. I will debate that person on this question anytime, anywhere. Do you accept my challenge, gentlemen? This is Dimitri Lascaris, coming to you from Kalamata, Greece for a Reason to Resist on April 4th, 2025.